The complexity of perception versus reality is one of the most profound aspects of human experience, influencing not only how we interact with the world, but how we understand ourselves and the people around us. From the moment we are born, we begin interpreting reality through the lens of perception. Our senses, our past experiences, our beliefs, and the subtle cues we receive from our environment all shape how we perceive events, actions, and intentions. Perception is not a passive reflection of reality. It is an active construction, a filter through which we process information and assign meaning. While this ability allows us to navigate a complex world efficiently, it also leaves us vulnerable to misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and emotional responses that may not align with the actual circumstances. Assumptions are perhaps the most influential aspect of perception. Every day, individuals make countless assumptions about the people around them, their motivations, desires, feelings, and intentions. These assumptions often feel justified because they are based on past experiences or logical inferences, but they are rarely infallible. For instance, we might assume that someone's silence indicates anger or disinterest, when in reality they are preoccupied, stressed, or processing their own emotions. In more intense situations, these assumptions can be magnified to the point where they shape entire emotional narratives, altering how we experience life and react to events. When these assumptions are inaccurate, they create a dissonance between what we perceive and what is actually happening, leading to emotional turbulence, unnecessary suffering, and, in extreme cases, profound grief. Consider the emotional weight of believing a loved one is lost or harmed when, in reality, they are safe or present in ways that we cannot immediately perceive. The mind fills in the gaps, constructing a story that feels logical and inevitable. Yet this story is often far removed from reality. The intensity of the grief or panic experienced in such moments reflects the human capacity to feel deeply, but it also highlights the danger of acting on incomplete or inaccurate information. Our perception, colored by fear, love, or previous trauma, can lead us to misinterpret neutral or unrelated events as personal or catastrophic. The greater the emotional investment in a person or outcome, the more likely perception can override reality, leading to responses that are disproportionate to the situation at hand. One of the reasons perception can diverge so dramatically from reality is that our cognitive and emotional systems are intertwined. Emotional reactions are often immediate and unconscious. Shaping our interpretation of events before conscious reasoning has the opportunity to intervene. For example, if someone has experienced a prior loss or betrayal, their mind may be primed to detect danger, absence, or rejection even in benign circumstances. This heightened sensitivity is adaptive in some contexts. It prepares the individual to respond quickly to threats, but it also means that emotional responses can amplify perceived negative realities that do not exist. In other words, the emotional brain may respond to a perceived threat as though it were real, even when the rational mind could recognize the situation as safe or misinterpreted. This interplay between perception and emotion underscores the importance of questioning assumptions and seeking clarity before reacting fully. It is a skill that requires both self-awareness and intentionality. One must learn to recognize when an emotional reaction is rooted in perception rather than verified reality. This involves pausing to examine the evidence, considering alternative explanations, and, when possible, communicating with others to confirm understanding. By doing so, individuals can prevent unnecessary suffering, reduce conflict, and respond to situations in a way that is both measured and informed. It also allows for the cultivation of empathy, as understanding that others' actions may be misinterpreted encourages patience and reduces reactive judgment. The story of someone grieving a loss that does not, in fact, exist is a powerful illustration of this dynamic. When a person believes their loved one has died, their emotional response is immediate, visceral, and overwhelming. Tears, heartbreak, despair, and even a sense of personal failure flood the mind and body. These reactions are entirely real and valid, yet they are based on a perception that does not align with reality. The depth of the emotional response demonstrates how strongly perception can dictate experience, often overshadowing the actual circumstances until clarity emerges. The subsequent revelation that the loved one is alive transforms grief into relief and joy, but it also highlights the potential consequences of allowing assumptions to dominate our interpretation of events. Perception versus reality is not limited to extreme situations. It plays a role in everyday life and relationships as well. Misunderstandings in communication, assumptions about others' intentions, and misinterpretations of social cues can create friction and tension that could have been avoided with careful attention and inquiry. For example, interpreting a partner's distraction as disinterest or hostility may provoke unnecessary arguments or emotional distance, when in fact the partner's mind is occupied with unrelated concerns. Similarly, assuming that a colleague's criticism is personal rather than constructive may generate resentment that damages professional relationships. In each case, the gap between perception and reality creates a cascade of consequences that affect both emotional well-being and interpersonal dynamics. Developing the ability to differentiate between perception and reality is both an intellectual and emotional skill. It requires cultivating self-reflection, emotional intelligence, and humility, the willingness to admit that what we believe may not be accurate. It also involves observing the world with curiosity rather than judgment, seeking evidence rather than relying solely on intuition or assumption, and practicing restraint before responding impulsively to emotionally charged perceptions. By engaging in this process, individuals can reduce unnecessary suffering and cultivate more authentic, informed, and compassionate responses to life's events. Another critical aspect of perception versus reality is understanding its relational dimension. Our relationships with others are particularly susceptible to misinterpretation because they are shaped by emotion, history, and expectation. People often see actions or words through the lens of their own insecurities or desires, projecting meaning that may not exist. The intensity of attachment amplifies the stakes. The closer the relationship, the greater the potential for misperception. Yet it is within these very relationships that clarity and understanding are most crucial. Asking questions, listening deeply, and maintaining open lines of communication are essential practices for bridging the gap between perception and reality. The gap between perception and reality can also provide opportunities for profound personal growth. When we recognize that our assumptions may not be accurate, we are invited to cultivate patience, to examine our fears and biases, and to approach life with greater openness. We learn that reality is often more complex, nuanced, and unexpected than our initial interpretations suggest. We learn humility, the understanding that certainty is rare and that our perspective is one of many. We learn empathy, as recognizing the fallibility of our own perceptions encourages understanding and compassion for the misperceptions of others. Furthermore, this dynamic emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and presence. When we react immediately based on perception alone, we risk being swept away by assumptions, fears, or projections. Mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them, to pause before acting, and to consider whether our interpretation of events is grounded in reality. This practice does not eliminate emotional response. It honors it, but it provides a space in which clarity, reflection, and discernment can emerge. Ultimately, the complexity of perception versus reality is a testament to the intricate workings of the human mind and heart. Our perceptions are essential tools that allow us to navigate life, yet they are imperfect reflections of reality, prone to distortion and misinterpretation. Emotional responses are powerful indicators of meaning and attachment, yet they must be tempered with inquiry and reflection to align with actual circumstances. By cultivating awareness of the difference between perception and reality, by questioning assumptions, And by seeking clarity before fully reacting, individuals can reduce unnecessary suffering, build more authentic relationships, and approach life with wisdom, resilience, and compassion. It is also a reminder that what we believe to be true may not be the entirety of the truth. Life is rarely black and white. It exists in shades of uncertainty, complexity, and hidden depth. Our assumptions may capture a fragment of reality, but they are never the whole story. In the same way, our emotional reactions are valid, yet they may amplify or distort the situation. Understanding this opens the door to patience, empathy, and measured action. In the context of human relationships, this principle carries profound implications. Love, grief, trust, and conflict are all filtered through perception. Misperception can intensify grief unnecessarily, create distance where connection is possible, and provoke conflict where none needs to exist. Yet, when clarity is sought and understanding is cultivated, the same circumstances can lead to reconciliation, empathy, and strengthen bonds. The interplay between perception and reality, therefore, is not simply a cognitive puzzle. It is a practical guide to living with emotional intelligence, relational maturity, and self-awareness. In conclusion, the complexity of perception versus reality shapes much of human experience. Assumptions color our emotional responses, and misinterpretations can create suffering, conflict, and unnecessary grief. Yet, by cultivating awareness, questioning assumptions, seeking clarity, and exercising patience, we can navigate this complexity with grace. We can learn to respond rather than react, to observe before judging, and to approach life with curiosity, humility, and openness. In doing so, we honor both the power of our emotions and the reality of the world as it truly exists, allowing us to live more fully, relate more deeply, and love more wisely. The depth of parental love is one of the most profound and universal human experiences, transcending circumstance, logic, and even reason. It is a bond that begins before a child can speak, a connection formed in the earliest moments of life, nurtured by attention, care, protection, and emotional attunement. This love is not contingent upon achievement, obedience, or performance. It exists in its purest form as an instinctual, unwavering devotion that binds parent and child together in ways that are deeply emotional, psychological, and often inexplicable. The story of a parent mourning a child who is believed to be gone, only for that child to be alive and observing, illustrates the extraordinary power of this bond. It is a vivid example of how parental love is both immediate and enduring, shaping reactions, emotional intensity, and even perception of reality itself. Parental love is often expressed in ways that are both subtle and dramatic. From the moment of a child's birth, parents are attuned to the smallest signals, a cry that indicates hunger, a change in breathing that signals discomfort, a hesitant step that demands reassurance. This hyper-attunement is a reflection of deep emotional investment and the recognition that the child's well-being is inseparably linked to the parent's own sense of purpose and meaning. The intensity of this connection often grows exponentially as children age, because love becomes intertwined not only with protection but with emotional co-experience. Parents celebrate every success, mourn every setback, and internalize joys and pains as though they were their own. This is why the idea of loss, even imagined loss, can produce a level of grief that is staggering, overwhelming, and visceral. In the story, the parent's grief is immediate and profound. Believing that the child has passed away, the mind and body respond in totality. Tears flow uncontrollably, the heart aches, and the entire being is consumed by sorrow. This reaction is not a reflection of weakness, it is a reflection of the depth of attachment. The intensity of grief mirrors the intensity of love. It illustrates how parental bonds are not superficial or conditional, but are embedded in the very fabric of emotional life. When a parent loves deeply, every thought of the child, every imagined scenario of harm or absence, triggers a profound emotional response because the parent perceives the child's life as inseparable from their own. What is particularly striking about this story is the parent's vulnerability in the presence of assumed loss. Despite societal messages that wealth, status, or success can protect one from suffering, the parent's tears demonstrate that emotional bonds cannot be overridden by material achievement. Love, in its deepest form, defies calculation and resists containment. It is not measured by provision, protection, or sacrifice alone. It is measured by presence, devotion, and the willingness to fully engage with the emotional life of another human being. In mourning, the parent is not reacting to an abstraction, but to the perceived absence of a being who embodies purpose, joy, and profound relational significance. This is why parental love can feel all-consuming. It is a force that integrates identity, meaning, and attachment in a single, powerful current of emotion. Another essential aspect of parental love illuminated in this story is its capacity to persist despite uncertainty. Even without confirmation of a child's presence, the parent's emotional connection remains intact. The heart responds to the possibility of loss with the same intensity as to reality, revealing that love is not contingent upon certainty. It is present in the imagination, in the anticipation, and in the projection of connection onto potential outcomes. In other words, parental love exists in layers. It is simultaneously grounded in reality, in memory, and in the emotional landscape constructed by the parent's attachment. This multidimensionality underscores the resilience and intensity of love, illustrating why parents can endure suffering, uncertainty, and even mistaken beliefs with remarkable emotional fidelity. The story also demonstrates the reciprocal nature of love, even when unspoken. The child, observing the parent's grief, experiences a complex emotional response: shock, fear, empathy, and a profound awareness of the parent's depth of care. This reflects the bidirectional influence of attachment. The parent's love shapes the child's emotional landscape, and the child's presence or absence shapes the parent's experience in turn. Children internalize the depth of their parents' devotion, often carrying it as a foundation for their own understanding of love, security, and connection. Even when separated, the invisible threads of emotional attachment remain potent, teaching both parent and child the capacity to feel deeply and the significance of relational bonds in human development. The story further highlights the unconditional nature of parental love. Unlike many adult relationships, which are negotiated and contingent upon mutual understanding, parental love is not dependent on the child's actions, achievements, or behavior. It exists independently of circumstance. In the story, the parent's grief is not mitigated by the child's perceived flaws, absence, or mistakes. The heart responds to the perceived loss with full intensity because attachment is unconditional. It is an enduring force that prioritizes the child's well-being, happiness, and presence above all else. This unconditional quality explains why parental grief is often unparalleled in depth. It is rooted in an emotional reality where the child's life is inextricably entwined with the parent's sense of purpose and identity. Another important lesson from this narrative is the way love amplifies emotional expression. In witnessing grief, the child learns the magnitude of devotion she had perhaps never fully realized. Parental love manifests not just in presence or care, but in the intensity of emotional reaction, the rawness of sorrow, and the willingness to show vulnerability. Love is not always quiet. It can be loud, visible, and overwhelming. The very act of grieving demonstrates the power of love and the seriousness with which a parent holds the child in their emotional world. It teaches that deep attachment is a combination of presence, intensity, and engagement with the full spectrum of human feeling. Furthermore, the story emphasizes the enduring quality of parental love, even in the face of mistaken assumptions. When the parent's grief is based on the belief that the child is gone, it illustrates that attachment is not confined to observable reality. It exists in thought, imagination, and emotional projection. This reveals that parental love is both resilient and persistent. It continues to flow even when the circumstances are uncertain or misinterpreted. The capacity to love deeply, even under mistaken beliefs, underscores the strength of the bond and its ability to shape human experience regardless of external verification. The narrative also teaches about the transformative potential of parental love. The parent's grief, though intense and painful, prepares the heart to embrace joy, relief, and reconnection when the truth emerges. Emotional investment in the child's life, the very thing that produces such profound sorrow, also allows for the deepest forms of gratitude and wonder when circumstances change for the better. Love's depth is mirrored in its capacity to integrate pain and joy, demonstrating the profound interconnection between attachment, vulnerability, and resilience. Additionally, the story highlights the educational value of observing emotional intensity. Witnessing the parent's grief provides insight into the nature of devotion, the complexity of attachment, and the ways in which love shapes human behavior. The child, observing silently, learns about empathy, sensitivity, and the transformative impact of deep emotional bonds. This observation is a formative experience. It teaches that love is not only a feeling but also a demonstration, a lived experience, and a relational force that has both immediate and long-term consequences for those involved. Finally, this story is a reminder that parental love is foundational to human development and emotional well-being. It is a primary source of security, a model for relational connection, and a template for emotional expression. By illustrating the extraordinary lengths to which a parent will grieve, hope, and remain emotionally present even in imagined loss, the narrative underscores how central parental love is to shaping the human experience. It teaches that the intensity, unconditionality, and persistence of this love are not only remarkable but essential for understanding the depth of attachment, empathy, and human relationality. In conclusion, the depth of parental love is a force that shapes perception, reaction, and emotional experience in profound ways. It is unconditional, enduring, and often demonstrated most vividly in moments of perceived loss or crisis. The story of a parent grieving a child believed to be gone while the child is secretly alive illustrates how attachment can produce both extraordinary pain and extraordinary insight. It highlights the reciprocity of love, the intensity of emotional bonds, and the capacity for attachment to shape both parent and child across time and circumstance. Parental love, in its depth and resilience, teaches us about the power of connection, the importance of vulnerability, and the enduring capacity of the human heart to care, grieve, and ultimately rejoice in the presence of those we love. The role of perspective and awareness is central to navigating the complexities of life, especially when events appear catastrophic or overwhelming. Humans are wired to react immediately to perceived threats, losses, or injustices. These reactions are often powerful, visceral, and uncontrollable, but they are largely shaped by perception, how we interpret a situation, rather than by the objective reality of what has occurred. Perspective, then, becomes a lens through which we filter our experiences, shaping not only how we respond emotionally, but also how we understand the meaning of events. Awareness is the companion to perspective. It is the ability to step back, observe one's own thoughts and emotions, and recognize that initial reactions may be incomplete or inaccurate. Together, perspective and awareness form a crucial framework for navigating life's uncertainties, enabling us to respond with clarity, patience, and intentionality, rather than impulsive reaction. In the story of a parent mourning a child who is believed to have died, while the child is secretly alive, perspective plays a defining role. To an observer, the grief appears natural, intense, and appropriate. The loss seems absolute. From the parent's viewpoint, the perceived tragedy is total. A lifetime of dreams, hopes, and daily moments has been obliterated. Yet the narrative reveals that what is perceived as irreversible loss may conceal unexpected truths. The child's actual presence, though hidden, transforms the narrative entirely. This illustrates a fundamental truth. What is seen on the surface may not reflect the underlying reality. Our initial interpretations are often incomplete, and the stories we construct to make sense of events may differ dramatically from the full truth. Perspective is shaped by the filters through which we view reality. These filters include personal experiences, cultural conditioning, emotional biases, and assumptions about how the world operates. For example, a parent who has experienced loss before may approach a new situation with heightened sensitivity, interpreting ambiguous signals as signs of catastrophe. Conversely, someone with a history of resilience may perceive the same situation with cautious hope, maintaining the possibility that the outcome is not as dire as it appears. The difference between these perspectives demonstrates that our interpretation of events is not purely objective. It is deeply influenced by the mental frameworks we bring to a situation. Awareness in this context becomes a critical tool. It allows us to recognize the lenses we are using, question assumptions, and open ourselves to alternative possibilities that may be hidden beneath the surface. Awareness also involves observing the automatic emotional responses that arise in moments of perceived crisis. In the story, the parent's grief is immediate and overwhelming. The tears, trembling, and heartbreak are expressions of deep love, but they are also influenced by the assumption of loss. Awareness would involve noticing that the intensity of the emotion is partly shaped by the perception of tragedy rather than confirmed reality. It does not diminish the authenticity of the grief, rather it allows for a broader understanding that emotions, while valid, may not be entirely aligned with the facts at hand. By cultivating awareness, individuals create a space in which they can respond to events more thoughtfully, balancing emotion with reflection. Patience is a natural extension of perspective and awareness. When one recognizes that initial interpretations may be flawed or incomplete, it becomes possible to pause before acting or reacting. In high-stakes emotional situations, this pause can prevent decisions driven solely by fear, despair, or misunderstanding. In the story, the parent's grief is genuine, but had there been a way to exercise patience and maintain openness to alternative realities, the experience might have been tempered with hope rather than consumed entirely by despair. Patience allows the mind to entertain multiple possibilities simultaneously, fostering resilience and emotional stability even in moments of uncertainty. The narrative also highlights how awareness can transform the meaning of an event. Initially, the perceived death of a child is an experience of ultimate loss. Every thought, every emotion, every gesture is suffused with sorrow. But once the underlying truth emerges, that the child is alive, the meaning of the experience is fundamentally altered. The grief, while real and justified, becomes a conduit for relief, gratitude, and renewed appreciation of life. This transformation demonstrates that perspective is not static. It is dynamic and malleable. Awareness allows us to reframe experiences in light of new information, altering not only our emotional responses, but also our understanding of the event's significance. Perspective also shapes how we interpret the intentions and actions of others. In the story, the parent's focus on loss blinds them to the possibility that the child is present and watching. The initial interpretation is limited by the assumption that absence equals loss. This limitation illustrates how narrow perspectives can obscure important realities, even when evidence exists to suggest an alternative interpretation. Awareness, in contrast, encourages active observation, curiosity, and a willingness to question assumptions. It involves asking, "Is this truly the whole story? Or could there be factors I am not seeing?" Such reflective questioning is essential for gaining a more accurate and holistic understanding of events. Moreover, perspective and awareness are closely linked to emotional resilience. By recognizing that initial perceptions may be incomplete or misleading, individuals can develop the capacity to withstand emotional upheaval without being overwhelmed. In the story, the parent's initial grief is profound, yet the eventual revelation transforms the emotional landscape entirely. The ability to hold space for multiple possibilities, to remain emotionally present while remaining cognitively flexible, allows for adaptation and growth even in the midst of apparent tragedy. Awareness functions as an anchor, helping individuals navigate the tension between what is perceived and what is real, reducing the likelihood of despair spiraling into hopelessness. The narrative also illustrates how perspective affects relationships. The child's silent observation of the parent's grief provides insight into the depth of attachment and the significance of emotional expression. From the child's perspective, the parent's intense emotion is a reflection of love, devotion, and the seriousness with which the parent values the child's existence. Awareness of this emotional depth shapes the child's understanding of relational bonds, empathy, and the responsibilities inherent in love. Perspective, therefore, is not only about interpreting external events, it is also about understanding the internal experiences of others, fostering connection and mutual understanding. Another essential aspect of perspective and awareness is the recognition that life's outcomes are rarely predictable. Human experience is filled with uncertainty, chance, and factors beyond our control. By cultivating perspective, we accept that immediate interpretations may be provisional, that events may hold multiple layers of meaning, and that reality often contains surprises beyond our anticipation. Awareness allows us to remain flexible, to integrate new information as it emerges, and to adjust our emotional and cognitive responses accordingly. This flexibility is critical for navigating the complexities of life, as it prevents rigid thinking and promotes adaptive problem-solving. The story also emphasizes the importance of mindfulness in shaping perspective. Mindfulness, the practice of observing thoughts, emotions, and external events without immediate judgment, supports awareness by creating a pause between perception and reaction. In moments of intense emotion, such as the parent's grief, mindfulness allows for acknowledgement of the feeling without allowing it to dictate assumptions or actions entirely. This creates space for reflection, curiosity, and openness to unexpected truths. When combined with perspective, mindfulness transforms experience from reactive suffering to conscious engagement, allowing individuals to process emotion while remaining connected to reality. Perspective and awareness also influence the way we construct meaning from life events. Humans have an innate drive to find narrative coherence, to explain occurrences in ways that make sense emotionally and cognitively. When perception is misaligned with reality, these narratives may be incomplete or misleading. Awareness enables us to revise these narratives as new information emerges, integrating lessons from experience and refining understanding. In the story, the eventual revelation that the child is alive transforms the narrative from one of despair to one of gratitude, relief, and renewed appreciation of life. Perspective and awareness are the mechanisms that allow this narrative transformation to occur. Furthermore, the story highlights the role of perspective in shaping emotional intensity. Events perceived as tragic often elicit more extreme responses than the underlying reality warrants. This is because perception amplifies emotional significance. The assumed loss of a child, for example, triggers an unparalleled level of grief, terror, and existential questioning. Awareness moderates this amplification by enabling the individual to recognize the provisional nature of their assumptions, opening space for consideration of alternative outcomes. By balancing emotional intensity with reflective awareness, individuals can navigate powerful feelings without being consumed by them. Finally, the narrative teaches that cultivating perspective and awareness is an ongoing practice rather than a one-time skill. Life continually presents situations that challenge assumptions, obscure truths, and demand adaptive understanding. The ability to maintain perspective, to remain observant and reflective, and to approach events with curiosity rather than judgment is a lifelong endeavor. It requires humility, the recognition that our perceptions are limited, that our understanding is partial, and that reality often contains elements beyond our immediate comprehension. In conclusion, the role of perspective and awareness is central to human experience, particularly in situations that appear tragic, overwhelming, or irreversible. Perception shapes emotional responses, but it is not infallible, reality often contains layers that are hidden from immediate view. Awareness allows individuals to step back, observe emotions and assumptions, and consider alternative explanations. Patience, curiosity, and openness to new information transform despair into relief, suffering into gratitude, and misunderstanding into insight. The story of a parent grieving a child believed to be lost, but secretly observing them alive, demonstrates the transformative power of perspective and awareness, showing how these qualities shape emotional resilience, relational depth, and the capacity to engage with life in a measured, conscious, and profoundly human way. The fantasy of being fully seen taps into one of the deepest human longings, the desire to be truly known, understood, and accepted, not for what one does, achieves, or manages, but for the inner world that often remains hidden from the public gaze. At the heart of this fantasy is the yearning to be acknowledged in all dimensions of one's existence, the vulnerabilities, contradictions, dreams, fears, and quiet thoughts that comprise a person's authentic self. It is a longing for attunement, for presence, and for recognition that transcends superficial understanding or performative affection. This fantasy reflects an aspiration for intimacy that goes beyond surface-level interactions, aiming instead for a connection rooted in psychological and emotional resonance. From an early age, women often learn to navigate the world by performing roles and meeting expectations. Society, culture, and relational dynamics frequently reward competence, reliability, and caretaking, while subtly discouraging the full expression of emotional depth or individuality. As a result, many women develop an internal landscape rich with thoughts, feelings, and desires that remain unspoken, either because they fear judgment or because they have learned to prioritize the needs and perceptions of others over their own self-expression. The fantasy of being fully seen emerges as an imaginative response to this tension. It is the mind's rehearsal of a reality in which one can exist without masks, where the hidden aspects of the self are recognized, validated, and embraced. Being fully seen is not synonymous with being admired or approved. It is not about external validation or superficial recognition. It is about attunement to the emotional and psychological complexity that defines a person. Women imagine moments where someone notices the subtle signals of their inner life, the fleeting expressions of anxiety, the quiet sparks of joy, the nuanced shades of disappointment and longing. These moments involve deep presence, a partner or confidant who observes without judgment, who listens without immediately offering solutions, who receives vulnerability without recoil. The fantasy envisions someone who is genuinely interested in understanding the totality of one's experience, even the parts that are messy, uncomfortable, or socially discouraged. This longing is closely tied to the human need for connection. Social and emotional bonds thrive when individuals feel recognized in their fullness. Feeling unseen, misunderstood, or reduced to roles and functions creates a sense of isolation, even within intimate relationships. The fantasy of being fully seen is therefore a psychological mechanism that explores the possibility of bridging that gap, imagining a world in which inner experiences are not just acknowledged, but are engaged with actively and empathetically. In these fantasies, recognition is not transactional, it is relational. It does not ask for reciprocation in the form of gifts, deeds, or words, but exists purely as the attentive reception of another human's inner life. At its core, the fantasy of being fully seen also reflects a desire for freedom from social and relational constraints. Women may feel the pressure to perform emotional restraint, to present a polished exterior, or to prioritize others' comfort over their own authenticity. Within the imagination, these constraints are lifted. The fantasy allows a woman to explore what it feels like to speak her truth fully, to display her emotions honestly, and to act according to her desires without fear of criticism or misunderstanding. It is an internal rehearsal for emotional courage, a safe space to explore vulnerability before testing it in real-life interactions. Another critical aspect of this fantasy is the validation of complexity. Human beings are inherently multifaceted, carrying within them desires, fears, contradictions, and layers of identity that can be difficult to reconcile or articulate. Women's fantasies often highlight the yearning to be recognized not merely for the aspects of themselves that are socially palatable or easily understood, but for the whole spectrum of their experience. This includes the parts they hide from the world, the insecurities, the ambivalence, the passions that may seem irrational or socially unconventional. To be fully seen is to have these complexities not only acknowledged but embraced, to experience a sense of wholeness and authenticity in the eyes of another. Presence and attunement, central to this fantasy, are themselves transformative experiences. Being witnessed in one's entirety can have profound emotional and psychological effects. It reduces feelings of isolation, fosters self-acceptance, and strengthens relational bonds. Women imagine scenarios in which someone pays attention to their thoughts and emotions with curiosity rather than judgment, with patience rather than interruption. This attentiveness validates the reality of their inner experience and signals that their existence is meaningful beyond what they do or provide. In essence, being fully seen is about being valued for one's very presence and interiority rather than for performance or utility. The fantasy of being fully seen also intersects with themes of trust and emotional safety. To allow oneself to be known in totality requires the belief that vulnerability will not be exploited, dismissed, or criticized. Many women have experienced relationships in which aspects of themselves were minimized, ridiculed, or overlooked. In these contexts, the fantasy becomes a space in which they can envision the possibility of safety, imagining a reality where expressing emotions or desires does not carry the risk of rejection. The fantasy serves as both an aspirational model and a rehearsal for cultivating real-life interactions that approximate this ideal of attuned presence. Furthermore, the fantasy underscores the importance of reciprocal empathy. Being fully seen is not a one-sided experience. It involves the interplay of attention, curiosity, and understanding. Women imagine partners or confidants who ask questions, notice subtleties, and respond to emotional cues with genuine care. This level of attunement is not easily achieved in daily life, where distractions, assumptions, and social norms often limit the depth of engagement. In the fantasy, the relationship is imagined as a container where emotional truths can be expressed freely, and where the complexity of human experience is honored and explored collaboratively. The fantasy also explores the interplay between visibility and self-discovery. When one is seen fully, the act of recognition often mirrors back a sense of self that may have been obscured. Women's fantasies include the transformative potential of this recognition. To feel understood can help clarify desires, reinforce identity, and cultivate confidence in expressing one's inner world. Being seen fully is not only about external validation, it is about integrating internal understanding with relational acknowledgement, creating a space in which self-perception and social perception converge harmoniously. Additionally, this fantasy illustrates the yearning for emotional reciprocity without performance. Women imagine moments in which they do not have to manage the impressions of others, modulate their behavior, or suppress aspects of themselves to maintain relational harmony. The fantasy creates a relational environment where authenticity is not risky but welcomed, where emotional complexity is appreciated rather than feared, and where presence is more important than productivity or appearance. It is the imagining of a relationship in which mutual curiosity and engagement create the conditions for profound intimacy. The fantasy of being fully seen also emphasizes timing and attunement. It is not merely about physical presence or occasional attention, but about consistent, focused engagement that aligns with the individual's needs. Women imagine scenarios where their inner states are noticed at the right moments, where subtle cues of distress, joy, or thoughtfulness are acknowledged. This attunement conveys respect for the rhythm of one's emotional life and communicates that the person is not only present but deeply aware. At its deepest level, this fantasy reflects the universal human desire for relational authenticity. To be fully seen is to be met with awareness, curiosity, and empathy, creating a space where inner life is not only acknowledged but celebrated. It represents the aspiration for relationships in which identity, emotion, and thought are not fragmented or hidden, but integrated and honored. Women's fantasies reveal a longing to be known in ways that transcend the transactional or functional dimensions of relationships, seeking instead the profound resonance that emerges when two people engage with each other's true selves. Moreover, the fantasy often includes a sense of liberation and empowerment. To be fully seen implies that one's voice matters, that feelings are valid, and that existence is significant beyond measurable accomplishments or societal expectations. This liberation fosters emotional courage, encouraging women to imagine expressing themselves without restraint, to explore the depths of their inner world, and to engage in relationships that allow for mutual growth and understanding. It is an aspirational vision that informs real-world desires, shaping how women navigate intimacy, friendship, and partnership. The fantasy of being fully seen is, ultimately, a vision of relational and personal wholeness. It reflects the need to be understood in context, to have one's emotional reality mirrored back with care, and to experience connection that honors vulnerability rather than punishes it. It is a deeply human longing that transcends gender, but is particularly shaped by social and cultural contexts that often require women to conceal, moderate, or compromise aspects of themselves. The fantasy imagines a relational space in which these compromises are unnecessary, a space of presence, attunement, and genuine understanding. In essence, the fantasy of being fully seen is about longing for intimacy that integrates the inner and outer self, vulnerability and strength, expression and reception. It illustrates how relational recognition is not superficial but foundational, providing validation, emotional security, and the possibility for authentic self-expression. It is a rehearsal for courage, empathy, and connection, offering insight into the ways that women, and indeed all humans, seek to be understood and valued for the richness and depth of their inner worlds. The narrative of this fantasy serves as both an aspirational model and a psychological map, guiding women toward cultivating relationships and environments that approximate this ideal. By understanding the components of the fantasy, presence, curiosity, attunement, validation, and emotional safety, one can begin to recognize patterns in real-life relationships that either support or inhibit the experience of being fully seen. It becomes a framework for reflection, growth, and the pursuit of deeper connection. Ultimately, to be fully seen is to be recognized in one's humanity in its entirety. Women's fantasies highlight that this recognition is not about perfection or constant positivity, but about acknowledgement of the totality of experience, the vulnerabilities, contradictions, passions, and fears that constitute the authentic self. The fantasy reminds us that true intimacy is built on presence, attunement, and care, and that the longing to be fully known is a reflection of one of the most fundamental aspects of human connection, the desire to exist authentically, witnessed, and cherished for who we truly are.